Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series, our little mini series called Behind the Mic. I'm going to take you behind the mic and help you be better as a podcaster. Here we go. Well, I like the new music. That's kind of interesting. Okay, well, I'm glad to have you here. This is the second in our little mini series around helping you as a podcaster to level up your skills and your ability behind the mic so that what comes through the mic into the amazing ears of your listeners resonates with them, connects with them, helps them in their journey as a podcaster, or helps them in the journey of whatever you talk about on your show. We're here to talk about how we can be better on the mic for the sake of our audience. And I'm glad you're here. So thanks for hitting play. We're going to talk today about crafting compelling stories as a podcaster. And we're going to look at how we can be better at the story side of podcasting. There's another book, the book that I talk about quite often, Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. Great book. It's something that you could I would suggest you buy or listen to as an audiobook, but it'll help you with your process of building better stories. But not just telling a better story, but crafting a compelling story is where I want to go in the conversation today. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for pressing play. Crafting compelling stories is at the heart of engaging with your podcast listeners. I want to give you some strategies to enhance your storytelling. So I got 4 for you, and then we're going to move on to another part to this whole piece around creating compelling stories. But here's 4 things for you to think about around just crafting a compelling story. You ready? Here we go. First one, identify relatable themes. A podcast listener comes to your show because they want to relate to you as a host, but they also want to relate to your content. It's great that people come for the episode but stay for the host, but we also want them to stay for what they get out of the content. So how do we do that? First, when we do our stories, we need to present them in a relatable theme where the listener can put themselves into the story. Focus on stories that really resonate with your audience experiences or interests. This could be personal struggles, triumphs, or insights that listeners can connect with on an emotional level. It's not all about filling their brains with information. It's not all about just being a great voice and accompaniment and companion in life, where they come to your show and listen to you because they really like you. But you really need to do something that really connects with them on an emotional level. And I think as podcasters, sometimes we get on the mic and we read a script to our audience, call it a day, slap on an intro and outro, and ta-da, we're done. Podcast uploaded. Well, as a listener, I don't feel like you're really connecting with me. I feel like you're reading to me. And I just kind of have this thing I'm thinking about as I listen to so many podcasts is an audiobook presentation the best presentation for a podcast where you're reading to me? Again, we don't talk like we write, and we don't write like we talk. So when somebody reads to me something that they've written, it doesn't feel like they're actually talking to me. It feels like they're kind of talking past me, like I'm not even in the room. I'm just kind of catching it. So I want to connect on an emotional level with you and your stories. So go back and listen to some of the stories you've done in your past episodes. Did you get to an emotional level in the story, or did you just stay informational in what you did? Go do some research, listen back. And when you do your next story in your next podcast, figure out how you're going to get to that emotional level and connection with your audience. And another thing you can do around crafting compelling stories is to use better descriptive language. One thing I love about audio podcasting, I know we have people who do video podcasts who listen to the show too. Hi, nice to have you here. In audio, you don't have the whole thing as of a picture's worth 1,000 words. We don't have that. So in true audio-focused podcast, we need to use language that's a little bit more descriptive, that leads the listener a little bit further into the story. And that's something we need to put into practice as we craft our podcast episodes. We need to use more vivid descriptions and try to add some kind of sensory details to bring your stories to life. This helps listeners to visualize and to immerse themselves into what the story's telling them in the moment. So how descriptive have you been in the past episodes of your podcast? So do you say, I went to the store, I bought a drink, and I went back to my car? Okay, well, I can picture that. But what did the store sound like? Did it have the little bell on the door, ding ding, as you walk through the door? Was it busy? Was it cramped? Was it crowded? Was it spacious? Was it like a little mom and pop shop? Was it a convenience store with a big chain and they've got tons and tons of stores and every store looks the same? What did it feel like? Was it cold in there? Was it warm? What were the smells? Could you smell coffee brewing in the back and like people chattering in the aisle next to you? And was the person behind the counter, were they friendly or were they not? Like, descriptive language really brings me into the environment and I can see myself in the story. So use descriptive language. It's really going to help your audience to connect with your story. The next part is you need some kind of structure to your story. Here's something that I've noticed in podcasting when I listen to podcasts. We all have different personality types, okay? We all do things differently. We are all different people. So by no means is this a blanket statement, meaning that everyone should be the same. Be you, be all you, every day, be you, okay? That's my basic thing that I want to make sure you understand as we talk about this. Now, if you struggle with a complete thought, so you introduce a topic, you talk about the topic, you conclude the topic. If that's not you, if you tend to go on tangents, if you tend to get misdirected, if you tend to lose your train of thought, if you tend to wander, if you say 5 different things in one sentence, like you're just all over the place, you never finish a thought, you never complete what you were your main point, what you're trying to get across. Your audience listening, again, without a visual cue, is trying to put the pieces together that you're not putting together. And when your stories have no structure, it really is frustrating to a listener to try to make things make sense. So my request of you, if you struggle, and even if you don't, but if you struggle with keeping on task, keeping on topic, and finishing a complete thought, then structuring out your story might be something that helps you to be more effective in communicating with your audience through story. So what does this mean? It means that you simply ensure that your story has a clear beginning, middle, and end. And complete your thought. Complete the story before you move on to something else. Don't be distracted. And don't be going off on tangents and forget where you were going in the original story. When I watch podcasters trying to podcast in front of a live audience, streaming, doing a chat, doing all these things, spinning all these plates and trying to get a complete thought out to the world, when, oh, Sally just popped into the chat. Oh, Ron has a question. Oh, that's funny. Adam just said something great in the chat. And you've completely forgot about the story you had just started or the thought. As a listener, it's very distracting, hard to follow. And because you're not there in the moment and you're listening to it after the fact, it's very hard to put the pieces together and you get lost in all of the distractions. So if you're a distracted person and you have a hard time staying on task and completing a thought, structuring your story is going to help. Maybe practicing before you do live podcast recordings in front of an audience would help. But try to maintain a structure that keeps your listener engaged and provides a satisfying conclusion to a thought, a story, an episode, a point, structure your story. Now, I'm not saying you have to read to your audience, but you need to know that I've hit the main points, beginning, middle, and end, and I've completed my thought before I move on to the next thing. Stories need a beginning, a middle, and an end. I hear a lot of podcasts that have their stories have a beginning and a middle. And sometimes they miss the end. And it's very hard as a listener to try to put all the pieces together. So be kind to your listener. Structure your story with a clear beginning, a clear middle, and a clear ending. It'll be more satisfying for them, and your listeners will listen longer. The last part under crafting compelling stories is to leverage sound design. Now, I use sound design in my podcast. I don't overuse it. It's not like I have 1,000 things going on behind the scenes, but having something that brings the audience in and makes them lean in a little bit is kind of cool. It's a pattern disrupt. It's something different than what people are anticipating. They're expecting a talking head. They're expecting an interview. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this thing that makes them go, what was that? And they either hit rewind or they lean in because they're like, I want to know more about this because something different happened. You can use music, sound effects, ambient noise to enhance a more emotional impact and atmosphere of your story. Sound design can really elevate the listening experience, making it more immersive. If you want an example, I have 25 episodes called the Daily Santa Podcast. It's a countdown to Christmas. And whether or not you believe in Santa or Christmas and the holidays, whether that's part of your culture or not, I would love for you to go listen just to the sound design elements in those episodes. You can find it at dailysantapodcast.com and go check it out and listen to what happens behind the scenes. Those episodes were recorded the day before they went out, and they took 7 to 10 hours each to create. Some of those episodes have more than 25 tracks, individual tracks that are over top of each other, all these different elements, music, sounds, sound effects, ambient noise, different voices. All of these things are happening in real time as that podcast was recorded. So if you want an example of me playing with Audacity and bringing in music, sound effects, ambient noise, and all these special effects, then go check out the Daily Santa Podcast. I would love for you to check it out. It's really fun. And you get to hear the elf version of me, which is quite interesting. So I would love for you to try that out. A compelling story requires easily identifiable and relatable themes. It requires descriptive language, a structure to your story, and leveraging sound design to fill in the gaps and bring your audience along. Very important. The next thing under crafting compelling stories is a challenge for you as a podcaster. And I'd love for you to spend some time on this. It's all around finding your unique voice as a podcaster. The one thing that makes your podcast so unique, so special, so different from all of the other podcasts, even the podcasts that talk about what you talk about, is you. Your unique voice is what sets your podcast apart and builds a loyal audience. Here's how to find and how to cultivate your unique voice in your podcast. Number 1, know your audience. Understand who your listeners are and what they respond to. And then tailor your tone and the style of how you do your podcast to resonate with the listener. Know your audience. Know them. And how do you do that? Have a way for them to tell them that they listen to your show. Have a way for you to talk to them. Have a way for them to do community with you. Know your audience. Get beyond the avatar, this fake listener who may or may not listen to your show, and get to the person who actually listens to your show by name, by location, by conversation, by interaction. You know exactly who listens to your show. I had somebody say to me they love the tone of the How to Podcast series. I don't have screaming guitars at the beginning and 80s have hair metal. I love 80s hair metal. I'm a guitar player and I play that all day. But I don't have that in my show. The tone of this show and the music is different for these episodes because I'm doing a little mini series, but the general tone of all the other episodes of the How to Podcast series is very calm and welcoming and relaxing. And that's how I want my show to be, calm and relaxing. I want you to come here and go, I don't feel stressed out listening to the show and it's so high energy and rah, 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 music, bang, sound effects. Ah. No, I want it to be relaxing for you to come and kind of settle in and enjoy what we're talking about here about podcasting. So know your audience. So my audience told me they like it. I'm going to keep doing it. The second part is to experiment with styles. So try different tones, record different ways for your podcast and edit differently in your software to find out what works best for you. Feedback from others, like me, I love to offer you feedback on your show, can be invaluable in refining your voice. So try different styles and tones. One thing you're going to notice if you listen to any of my How to Podcast series, go back in time, you'll see mini-series like I'm doing right now. A clump of episodes where we talk about a certain topic and we kind of go deep on that and kind of set everything aside and focus on the mini-series. And then we move back to what we have guest co-hosted episodes. We have Daily Daves. We have solo episodes with me. We have all these different elements that we do on the show. So we're always playing and experimenting with the style of the show. So it's not an interview-based podcast. It's not a solo-based podcast. It's a mix of everything. And why am I doing that? Because it's not just a show to tell you how to podcast. I want to show you how to podcast by doing all these different things and playing and coloring outside the lines and giving you permission to do the same. So to find your unique voice, experiment with different styles. And the third part, under finding your unique voice, really important, authenticity is the key. Be true to yourself. That's authenticity. Avoid mimicking other podcasters. Avoid trying to sound like somebody on the radio. Stop trying to pretend to be somebody else. And I think as early in our podcast journey, we don't know our own voice. We've never done this before. We didn't go to school to learn how to be a broadcaster and be on the radio. We don't have that kind of background. We are coaches and speakers and authors and musicians, and we work at a retail place. We serve at a diner. We are a single parent. We've never been on a microphone. This is all brand new to us. So sometimes when things are new, we try to just emulate somebody that we admire and think we have to sound like them. You don't have to sound like somebody who is voicing and doing color commentary for a sporting event and yelling and saying all these things. You don't have to be like that. You don't have to put on an accent or pretend to be someone else or be an exaggerated version of yourself to the point where it's not even real. Be authentic. Develop a voice that reflects your unique personality and the brand and tone of your show. So if you meet me in person at a conference, at a coffee shop, or wherever, you and I have a conversation, you're going to hear the same Dave here that you're going to meet in person. This is who I am. Find your authentic voice and don't worry about what people might say about your voice and who you are and how you sound. Be you, and the right people will find you and they will connect with you. The people who don't enjoy the sound of your voice, the people who don't like you reading to them on a podcast, you know what? They might leave a review and tell you they don't like what you do. But generally, most people just quietly leave the podcast and move on to another show. You'll never know. You'll never know why they left. So relax. Be authentic. Be you. Because if you try to be somebody else, it's very hard to maintain that long term. And the moment we meet you in person, we're we're going to realize it's all a show. You're fake. There's nothing authentic about you. And the person that we feel like we know is not the person we are meeting in real life. So be authentic. The next thing around your podcast, as far as crafting compelling stories, is how to balance fact and fiction in storytelling. So there's three little parts I want to cover off here under this part about balancing fact and fiction in storytelling. It's really crucial, especially in genres like true crime or historical narratives, to have these three components to fact and fiction in storytelling. First is transparency. You got to clearly distinguish between factual information and creative liberties that you do just to make the story better. Kind of the padding, the extra that you add to the facts or replace the facts. Understand that people listening to you in real time don't really have the ability to fact check what you're saying, to do research. They're listening to you going, well, Dave said it's like this, so it must be like that. And they take your content and absorb it, make opinions about it. They start sharing your thoughts with other people as if it's their thoughts. It becomes a piece of them. So make sure that you're transparent and saying, these are facts, and this is creative license. This is my opinion about the fact. And the one thing I would say in all of this around balancing fact and fiction is wherever you can, when you're referencing a resource that's not you, like a blog post, an article, a news story, a YouTube clip, another podcast, that you cite your sources. I think that's really important because people then can go do their own research on their own time, and then they'll come to know that it's part of your show notes. It's part of your podcast information for each episode, that you provide the details of where you got what you got and how you're sharing it. There'll be links in this podcast for the information that I'm pulling from to create this for you. So very important. Transparency. What's a fact? What's creative license? Another one is researching thoroughly. Don't just go and do a quick Google search, grab it and go, but ensure that any factual elements or statements or numbers or quotes are actually well researched and accurate. This is going to help support the narrative, and it also enhances the impact of your content and your storytelling ability. Because you've done your research, you know this topic because you've spent some time and invested yourself in learning about it. And then always respect the subject matter. Be mindful of any sensitivity topics that you cover. So if you're talking about a certain thing that might be a trigger for people, you need to let them know and be sensitive to that. And if there's a real life tragedy being discussed on your podcast, maybe you're interviewing somebody, that you let people know. I'll give you an example. I had on one of my podcasts, I had an author on. Now, the topic of her book wasn't like something that couldn't be heard in a public setting, and it wasn't like rude or anything like that would make people like freak out. But I did give a warning up front that, hey, the topic of what we're going to talk about today is probably not something that your children would probably understand in the moment. So if you're listening in the car with your kids, maybe come back to this episode later so that you don't have that happen for you and your family. And somebody reached out to me and said, thank you. That's exactly what my environment was when I hit play on your episode. So I just skipped the episode and came back later. Thank you for giving me the heads up. So do that. Respect the subject matter in your podcast. So the last part in all of this around crafting a compelling story in your podcast goes back to incorporating your personal anecdotes effectively into your podcast and into your storytelling process. So there's three things here. First is all around create something that's relevant to you, relevant to your content, and relevant to your audience. Very important. Ensure that your podcast stories are relevant to the topic or lesson that you're conveying, what you're talking about on your show. This really helps maintain the listener's interest and reinforces the message behind what you're talking about on your podcast and in your stories. Again, back to authenticity. Make sure you share genuine experiences that illustrate your points. Authenticity really does build trust and connection with your audience to not just rattle off a bunch of facts But to put a piece of you into the story, I think really helps. So something that's happened to you, firsthand knowledge, something you've experienced, really helps ground your story and give context, and helps us to relate to you as a human being, not just somebody who can read to us from a script. The other part too is just help to set some boundaries. Be mindful of your comfort level when sharing personal stories. If your personal story is very intense, it's something that you don't tell very many people about, and people would be shocked to hear your story because you've never shared it before. Use some guidance, use some boundaries, some guardrails for how much you want to share. Remember, our voices are going out onto the internet, and the internet, as some people will say, writes in ink. So it's pretty permanent in the sense that your voice is going to travel around the world. People are going to hear your story. So be careful about giving places, times, names of people who haven't given you permission to use their name. Be careful about using any company names and then saying bad things about them. All of these people will take your content and they will filter it through their lens and come up with their own assumptions and sometimes misunderstand what you say. Create boundaries. Be mindful about how much you want to share with people, how much of your own personal life you want to put on display. Are you going to talk about your kids? As they grow up, are they going to be okay with what you say about them on the mic? Just understand that your words have power, your words have impact, and your words could have results that you may not be anticipating. So early in your podcast journey, just understand that personal anecdotes are great, personal stories are great, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that does not hurt your family, hurt your future, get you fired, break relationships within your family. You talk about your partner and how they sleep at night and how loud they are when they snore. Is that something you want to go out there to the world? Because people are going to hear it and then off they go, right? So just understand that you need to be careful with how much you share and understand that right from the beginning. These strategies into podcasting around creating a compelling story can help you create stories that engage with your podcast listeners, that help educate them, inspire your listeners to take your content and apply it to their lives through story. Just remember, the key to successful storytelling is to balance the entertainment side of what you do with the educational value of what you're bringing as well. Make sure that your audience leaves with something meaningful from every story and every opportunity and every time they press play. By doing so, they're going to come back. When you get together with your co-host or your guest and you just have a conversation about life and things, and you get to the end and you're like, what did we talk about? I don't know. Your audience is also going, why am I here? Why did I stick to the end of this episode? There's no clear beginning, middle, or end. I don't feel like there's any educational value for me. I didn't emotionally connect with the content. I felt like I was read to. I don't feel like I was engaged with the audience or with the host. So what do I get out of this? And that's a key component to podcasting. As much as I say podcast the way you want and do the show that you would listen to, keep in mind there's other people who listen to your show as well, and make sure you serve them. Don't be too self-serving where you just create an episode and a podcast that you love but no one would ever listen to. Make sure that you're always thinking of your listener in everything that you do. When I do my pre-interviews with my clients and my guests who come on the show, I always tell them there's one other person here when we record, and that's the listener. At any time we can refer to them, bring them into the conversation, and make them feel welcome into what we're saying, will make the episode better, and people will respond. So don't forget your listener. When you get together and talk about life and music and movies and things, remember there's someone listening who's not there in the room during the recording, and they're going to be processing this through their lens at a different point in time without seeing you in some cases. Don't forget the listener. Make sure that you include them in your stories and tell better stories. Again, go check out Storyworthy from Matthew Dick's great book. I like the audio version of the book, and you'll get some great ideas on how to tell a better story. So check out the link in the show notes. Head over and support Matthew and grab a copy of the book. And I want you to challenge yourself in your next episode of your podcast, if you're not a storyteller, historically, to start peppering in little stories here and there. And if they come from your experience and things you've done and things you've seen and things you've lived, even better. Can't wait to hear your podcast. Would love to get a link to it. I'd like to listen to it. I'd love to support you as a podcaster. I'm always looking for another show to listen to. So reach out, send me a link, leave me a voice message. Somehow, get me a link to your show so I can listen and support you and get you some more listens to your podcast as well. And I like to tell people about your show. So come on here as a guest co-host and let's talk about your podcast. And then you can brag about your show all you want and get more listeners who listen to this show. Come and follow you on yours. On the How to Podcast series. Thanks for listening. Got more episodes coming up from behind the mic to help you to be a better podcaster, to help you to connect with your audience better, and for you to up-level your skills as a podcaster. Great episodes coming up. And thank you for being here. Go tell better stories. Thanks for listening. So I get asked quite often, usually at the end of a podcast, like right now, Dave, how can we help you? Like, how can we, as a listener, support the show? Can we come rake your leaves? Can we cut the grass? Shovel the snow? Watch your dog? Help you move? What can we do? Clean your dishes? Oh, that'd be interesting. Well, if you can't do that because, you're in Poland, maybe you can help us by supporting us with our Buy Me a Coffee. It's right there on our website. And, it just will help us to, A, stay fueled because, we drink a lot of coffee around here. And it helps the show. So if you want to help us, it's out of the goodness of your heart. I can tell you that listening to the podcast to this point, you've already helped us so much. But I do have people saying, Dave, I'd love to give back something small, even just to the show. Buy Me a Coffee link is on our website, howtopodcast.ca. And you can support the show that way. It would mean a lot to have you on our team supporting what we do here. If you find value in the show, then that's great. Share the show. Tell somebody about it. And when somebody says, Dave, I want to start a podcast, who should I check out? Oh, you should go check out the How to Podcast series. Because of all the great co-hosts and all the things that happen here, the meetups, everything. And I would appreciate that. And then fill our cup once in a while if you can. But again, thank you so much for being here and supporting the How to Podcast series. Take care. Talk soon.